This is Groundeffected. My name is your dad, which is one of the most random things to say to friggin' strangers on the internet. This week, I am helping my friend Nympha to show you all about her Patreon. And to be totally honest with you, I actually really like helping artists because I know that some of them are too afraid to actually promote themselves. It's just one of those things, as artists, we are just freaking done with that. And as I said, this video is going to be helping promote my friend Nympha. And I'm going to be painting her Tifa and Aerith models. I don't even know how to say that other girl's name, but let's just pretend that was it. And in case you were wondering, I printed those two models on my Uniformation GK2 as well as my GK3 Pro. That basically it was just this machine and that machine because it was so quick. Also, you may notice that the base is a random blue color. That is not a blue resin, that is just FDM printed. And for that, I used my X1 carbon to print that. And when it comes to paints, I am literally spoiled for choice. This is not my personal collection, but it is a part of my entire shop because I do have a shop. And as I am an artist, it is my job to be useless at business, and so I cut that part of my business out. But that's enough waffle about absolute nonsense. Let's just start painting this model, these models, otherwise this would be a weird video.
Who the hell could stop me? Go!
Once I've got the model prepared and ready to get painted by sticking old paintbrushes up into the holes of every little part, I can start painting all the little bits separately. For the base, because it's FDM, I'm going to give it a thick layer of paint, and that is coming out of a Montana spray can, which is essentially an acrylic paint, but it comes out quite thick and it fills a little bit of the gaps. You can still kind of see that there's layer lines, but let's not talk about it, and let's move on to talking about the base. And on the base, I need to create some kind of a sandy look, so I gave it at least some form of shadows first, and I'm going to come back in by turning my airbrush right the way down to make it speckle. The thing that you hated doing when you're trying to paint skin tones or something smooth. Yes, that's the exact thing we needed to do right now in order to create that sandy look on the base. And as you can see, I'm just working through different layers of that brown that I'd picked out earlier. There was like 3 browns, and I kind of like started with the darker, moved on to the medium, and then on to the lighter. I'm now going to take some Killerman Flesh, which has got like a reddish kind of brown in it, and this is going to create the darker spots that we need in the base as well. While I'm here at my airbrush booth, I might as well just use some Wraithbone and quickly spray that over the bowl, and now you can see exactly what that sandy textures comes out like. I did come back with a little bit of white into the brighter brown color and just sort of like speckled that in the highlight areas, but that is not necessary, and you will get a speckly look, making it look like sand. And then you can move on to painting Patrick on the base. Of course, I'm going to paint him orange, even though Patrick's kind of pink and not orange, but we'll pretend that it is Patrick for purposes of I don't know what. Anyway, once I've done doing that, I'm going to spray a darker orange over the top, and then I'm going to spray a red wash over the top of that, just into the edge corners, and that makes it look like it's got some detail without even having to dry. Now I'm going to take some glue and I'm going to glue that piece into the base, because if this comes apart when you're shipping, you don't need these two pieces to actually come apart. And what I mean is, if the model comes off of it and you take this off, it doesn't matter, and you can ship this thing as is. It doesn't need to come apart fully. It was just cut like this to make it easier for you to paint. And speaking of painting, here are some paints that I chose to paint the beach ball with. However, I will be totally honest with you, after I had done this pink, I realized that the other pink that I had chosen that was just darker pink was not going to work, so I decided to go with a purple, which is actually blue violet in this case, and I used that in place of that darker pink that I showed you at first, which is clearly not the right color, and this definitely is the right color. It looks so much better. Now I'm going to use the green, which is kind of like a bluey green. It's just really soft, kind of pastel-y colors, and then to make that ball look nice and shiny, I'm going to use some fairy dust through my airbrush over the top of it. And then I'm going to take some white ink and give all of the models a zenithal highlight, and that, I mean the rest of the models, obviously not the base, because I've already painted that by this point. This video was sponsored by Nympha 3D, and for just as low as $10 a month, you can join on their Patreon and get yourself 2 to 3 models of that specific month, as well as models that come from the previous months in their standard versions with no variations. This also includes a welcome pack featuring exclusive models of Tifa Lockhart, Yuzuriha, Doobie and Raven. Participate in the monthly polls and voting to choose upcoming models, as well as a 20% discount on their previous models. There are other tiers. Please go check out the description if you want any of these amazing models, as well as the one I'm working on in this specific video. You want to go and check them out. In the description there is a link. Go there right now, join them, tell them I sent you, and go print some excellent models. Maybe it'll make a bit more sense later on, but essentially I've made this video in conjunction with Nympha 3D because there is going to be something that she's doing for us, and this is a trade for that. And in an effort to be as transparent as possible, that is why I'm telling you this, because later on we're going to need to, I'm going to need you to support me when I release my model. We're at a point in the video where I have no idea what I've actually recorded and what I haven't recorded. This is probably one of the first times in a long time that this has happened to me. However, I'm not doing this video on a normal schedule, so things are a little bit backwards, and there are many other things happening all at the same time. And yes, that is a terrible excuse for making a weird, wonky video. However, this is what it is. It is what it is, and we have to deal with it, or there will be instructions for what you can do if you don't like it at the end of the video. So let's touch base with what we've got done so far. I've done the base, and I have laid down a load of white on top of these models because they are getting prepared for having their skin tones painted. I've also separated out all the extra bits that don't go skin tone color, and those are now sitting and waiting for their paint. I might actually just throw on some browns and stuff, which is whatever those colors are, mostly like her hair. One is black, one is brown, reddish kind of brown, and that might be what I'll do. I might even paint that skirt, but I think that's going to be all for today because it is already 5:30. So I'm gonna paint probably till like 6:30, then clean up and go home. On account of, I know that I say my name is your dad, but I'm actually not your dad. I am the dad of some other children though, and also the partner of another person, so I do need to go and have a life after work somehow. Also, speaking of life after work, I know this is super random in the weirdest spot, but for those who are following along with my journey, I finally got the casting machine, so that's pretty cool. And that means that casting is coming very soon, and if you've looked on my Instagram stories you will know that there is something coming, and that something has something to do with these specific gemstones that you may or may not be seeing due to the terrible focus because I'm not very good at doing this thing. But anyway, that is part of that future project. Enough about that waffle, let's just get back into painting the ladies. Now moving on to the next steps of painting these ladies, what I'm going to do now is quickly smash some of those browns onto Aerith's hair. I don't know how to say this girl's name, but I'm going to just say it like that. I took some Luftwaffe uniform and I sprayed that onto Tifa's hair, and now I'm going to take just a pink and I'm going to spray that over Aerith's skirt. I'm going to use some magenta as well so that I can start painting some pinkle on their skin tones, and I'm going to then obviously come back into that magenta afterwards, and I'm going to spray red into the shadows. In this case I'm using Blood Angel's red because I really want a good contrast between actual pink, which is the magenta, and the bright or darkish kind of red that would essentially be underneath your skin. Imagine taking your skin off and what you would have left is a bloody mess. That's pretty much what you have here. Rip the skin off, you look like this. That's what I think anyway. You could probably have some greens and blues in there too, but that's just getting way too complicated and making life difficult. Now I'm going to take some brown rose and mix this around 50-50 with water in my airbrush and spray that practically over everything. Bearing in mind that if I spray too hard, too thick, or too much, I'm going to cover up that red that we've added underneath the skin tones, which, by the way, I like to call pinkle, and I know you're probably screaming at the screen right now. He hasn't said the word. He never used the correct words for the color. Don't worry about it. It's there. It's pinkle. Sometimes it's pink. Sometimes it's purple. Don't worry about it. 'Tis a new day. Today is an entire new day, and I'm going to be carrying on working on the model. I look up. That's because the models are hanging above there in my... Let me just show you. One of the most difficult things to do when you're painting models, especially with an airbrush, is to find somewhere to place them once you have painted them. And in my case, the best place has just been in my camera holder, because there's a load of little holes everywhere and I can just shove paintbrushes into the holes on the parts and just stick them in there, and Bob is your uncle. They hang there very nicely and dry, although it is a bit precarious because they are not very stable in there, and it does wobble and things have fallen in the past. But as I always say, are you even hobbying if you aren't taking a risk? Well, don't take a risk. Hang your models precariously, don't take risks, that's all. Now, you may have noticed that I was doing both the skin tones on both the ladies at the same time. However, we want them to look slightly different to each other, so we're gonna sort of use more of the lighter and less of the darker, if that makes any sense, on one or the other. So basically, I put a little bit more of the orcish dermis onto Tifa than I did on Aerith, and that's just how it works. You don't have to do it that way. You can also come back and add some tints over the top of it if you want to, but one of the main things that I like to do, and is synonymous with my style, is adding the highlights, and I make the highlights really bright. This way it makes it look like the depth is so much more depther. It's kind of a miniature painting technique and not necessarily a statue painting technique, but it does work really well if you want to push the values in your piece. I want to add a little bit of a tint over the tops of those skin tones because they do feel to me a little bit desaturated. It feels a bit like the color has been taken out a bit. This is probably because I've covered up way too much of the skin tone that I put down before I put down skin tone, the pinkle layers, and that yellow is going to make them look slightly tanned, but also it's going to smooth everything over between each little layer. This is called a glaze, and that glaze is what makes the thing look silky smooth. And now that the skin tones are done, I can put them aside to dry before I come back and work on anything else that involves the skin tones. Now I'm going to start working on the skirt for Aerith, and I'm going to use a Magos purple to shade that so that it has some shadows in the shadows, obviously. I'm then going to take some of this Wraithbone and paint over the little skirt piece. I don't even know, the rim of the skirt. It's a word, I don't know what the word is for that piece. Just imagine it, you saw me doing it, taking a dark pink. I'm going to paint the bow next to it, and I'm also going to use that same dark pink, I'm pretty sure, and I'm going to paint like a little line around the outside. You see that line there? You may not have seen me do it. That's probably because I forgot to record that part, or I just cut it out the video like an absolute schmuck while I wasn't looking. Anyway, using that same Wraithbone, I painted her shoes. I will be honest though, this Wraithbone needs 2, even possibly 3 layers to actually be flat, and that drove me up the bloody wall. So when it comes to Tifa, I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use deck tan instead, because I cannot be asked with painting 4 layers to make something flat. Anyway, painting the buckles on her shoes is pretty simple really. What you may have noticed as well is that I used a contrast paint, which is like a whitey grey kind of color, and I sprayed that into the shadows to give those shoes a nice shadow. Now that the skirt, the legs and the shoes are done, I can shove her in the base and move on to working on some of the rest of the bits that have the skin tones on them. Never mind my amateur video making skills, let's just ignore whatever happened there and just move on to the rest of the model. Now obviously I need to paint some of these parts that are attached to the model. You could mask these out and airbrush them, which would give you more opportunity to add some shadows and highlights and all the rest of the stuff that goes with it. However, I don't like doing that. I don't have time for doing that, especially with the time frame of which I have working on these models. Usually I have 1 week to paint and edit and record and everything for that model. Lately I've been doing 2 models a week, and in this case there are 2 models just on this one model alone, meaning I've done 3 models this week alone. And time is something that I just don't have when it comes to this stuff, so neither is patience anymore, to be totally honest. So I just painted with a brush, and as you can tell, doing it this way still works. It still does the thing you need it to do. You just got to be careful and kind of plan your route carefully. If you know that the color that you're painting over the top is going to be darker than the color that it might overspray on, don't do it. That would be dumb. You would want to try and mask it off in that case. However, if you are careful about it and you work around the colors being lighter in each order, you can get away with some pretty diabolical things when airbrushing a model. Now I'm going to move on to painting the face for Aerith, and she doesn't have eyebrows sculpted, however it's fairly simple. I just followed the line of her brow itself, and then I added a bunch of little strokes to make it look like there are tiny little hairs on her forehead like caterpillars that are her eyebrows. Next I'm going to work on her eyes, and I'm going to paint black over the top and around the side corners, and this is to create the eyeliner. Obviously I'm also going to take one of my brightest skin tones and I'm going to paint a very thin line just at the bottom of her eyelid, and this helps to brighten it up as well as it makes it look like there is some kind of a makeup on, even though I have no idea how makeup works. Now her eyes are green, so I'm going to take Dark Angel's green and a bright green of some kind, and I'm going to paint at first with the Dark Angel's green the shape of her eyes, and then I'm going to take that brighter green and paint that just in the center. The hard part of painting the eyes is just making that first circle fit the eye perfectly. If you work on that by painting a small one and then building it up slightly bigger, it's going to give you a much easier time to get it in the right place. Once I've put the black pupil in, the only time I'll ever use white in a model ever is for the highlight in the eyes. That is a specular highlight, a big one on the top right hand side or the top left hand side, but then the opposite side of that needs a very tiny specular highlight. And once she's done, or at least her face is done, I can stick her head on the model and move on to painting the other, because I can't say it's done yet until I've painted the other model that is on this base. On the other model, which is Tifa, she has a slightly more complicated pattern going on her costume, and basically it just requires me having to paint a little bit of this dark blue over certain areas, and then using, like I said, deck tan this time, because that Wraithbone was driving me absolutely nuts. But you can already see that this seems to cover a hell of a lot better and with a little bit less effort than what that Wraithbone did. So once I've done that, I'm going to take again the exact same apothecary white, which is technically grey, it's not really white, and when you spray it very carefully without getting too much overspray, it will help to make it look like there are shadows in those areas. Now I can place these legs, which are obviously done, right next to Aerith, and I'm ever so closer to having this entire model done. The same blue was used for the top part of her costume. Obviously it would be dumb to use a new blue and a new type of white, because you would then be changing the colors and it would look mix matched, like one person painted the bottom and another person painted the top. You don't want that to happen, because then it's going to look weird. So I used the exact same colors to paint the top portion of her costume as well. And genuinely for me, Magos Purple is one of the best colors to paint lips. It is like the most natural-ish looking color, specifically for my style of painting, other than painting red over the lips, which I don't really like, obviously. If you're at the beach, you might have a bit of makeup on, but I don't think you're gonna put friggin' lipsticks all over the place. Now it's time for me to put my glasses on, which by the way are just a cheap pair of 4x zoom lenses that you can buy at the reading glasses shop, which I don't think is a shop, but I bought it at the cheap like pound store, which is like a dollar store, which is just a cheap shop where you can buy cheap crap. This was one of those cheap crap things, but genuinely it's helped me so much to be able to see, because as I get older, it makes it much more harder for me to see these things. If you're struggling, just buy a pair of these glasses, wear them on the tip of your nose so you can look through them when you are painting and look over them when you need to dip, because trust me, it will blow your mind when you do this and you feel like you're on a rocking boat. But we're talking about too much waffle. Let's get back to painting the model, and here you can see me taking some black and putting it into the shadows, because that lift off the uniform that I put earlier was just too blue, and she doesn't have blue hair, she actually has black hair. For her eyes, she has brown eyes, so I used the darker brown to set up the eyes. like I said earlier, setting them up is the most important part. Once they're set up, it's kind of free going from there. All you have to do is make sure that the lighter color fits inside of the color that you set down, paint a tiny little black dot, as well as some specular highlights. Again, the only time that I ever use white on a model. I can then place the hair onto her head, which clicked in with a satisfying click, by the way, and then I can put that model part onto the model and actually call this model done. And so we have reached the end of yet another Groundeffected video. Hopefully this video gave you some insight into how to paint these two specific models, and if not just these models, maybe it gives you insight into other models that you might be working on. There might be something in this video that helps you, and if there is, let me know in the description down below, and not in the description because you can't even put words there. You see, it starts getting hard by the end of the video to even make sentences make sense. You know what I'm talking about. Leave some words in the little square box that YouTube gives you to leave words in. While you're down there, leave a like and a subscribe, share the video with your granny and maybe even your mum. At the end of the day, this video is now done, and I'm just gonna go on to thanking my patrons, because without the patrons I would not be able to do this thing that I do every single week without fail. So thank you to the patrons for supporting me. If you want to support me and get some exclusive behind the scenes access, information on what's coming next and what is happening in Groundeffected Studios, then go check out the description for the Patreon as well. And also merch. If you want merch, merch is underneath. T-shirts, hat, mousepad, buy it. We need to buy it to support channel. Thank you for your great cooperation. Now I want to say a massive thank you though to Nympha for sponsoring this video, of course, and also it is now time for me to tell you my favorite thing in the video, and that's I can't even at this point, my words just don't work. F off.